It's always good to start off with a slight problem, isn't it? Yeah, cool. So thank you very much for inviting me. And today, I know it's Mental Health Month, and we're going to talk through a number of things. But I really want this to be a positive time for us, and because the topic we're going to be looking at today is Esther, the heroine of life after tragedy. All right? Finding new hopes and dreams after tragedy. And so Mark came and said, because the last few times I've been, we've talked about coping with grief, trauma, sadness, how as Christians we cope with that kind of thing. And so this thing of, what can we do? What can we talk on? That's a little bit more about how to find hope, how to have new dreams and new goals when we feel it's been stripped away from us. So this can appear and feel like it's a very serious time, and I do want to acknowledge that really carefully in that way. And the reason I want to do that is because of two things. I want to be able to acknowledge that all of us at times carry sadness, we carry tragedy, we carry a background where we've had things stripped away from us. As you know, you all probably know me a little bit. My work is to respond to tragedies nearly every day. I do all the critical incidents, homicides, suicides, deaths, accidents, injuries. So on a daily basis, I see people who have had their hopes and their dreams stripped from them. They have had tragedies occur, or they've found out that they have illness occurred, or they've had injuries that have incapacitated their limbs in some way and form. And it can be really tough, can't it? So I do want to acknowledge that today before we begin, that actually somewhere along in here, there may be some of us who are suffering from the result of hearing bad news. You may be sitting there going, actually, you know what? I thought I was going to have this in life, and I love God and I love what I do, but actually I've had this taken away from me. It might be a sad marriage. It might be ill health. It might be, like I say, an accident and injury. So we're going to go forward and quietly have a look at that. So is that all right if we do that today? And like I say, I do want this to be positive. And hopefully we'll get there. But I do want to acknowledge this, to be able to find new hopes and dreams, first of all, you've got to address some tough stuff. So let's start with this first of all right? Rule number one, I would say that if you're going to find new hopes and dreams, you have to acknowledge this, which is that pain and loss are an inevitable part of life. Is that correct? I know we don't like to say that as Christians. It can be really hard. We grow up in this life. We grow up in a world where actually we go, I love God. I serve God. I'm born into a Christian home. And it's nice being in New Zealand, but it's very safe. But, if we're living in somewhere else, like where we've just had our last speaker talk overseas in Indonesia, where actually everybody around you is Muslim, and they target you, you expect persecution. You expect things to go wrong. And in overseas countries where there is poverty or there's war, our world is filled with war at the moment, from Russia through to Gaza, through to Israel, to different areas. And it doesn't matter what sides you take. There are Christians that sit in the middle of this that are actually have lost their loved ones. In other words, they expect it. We live in a very wealthy, opulent world in New Zealand, Western countries. But you know what? Where I was born and where my family lived, all my grandparents and my great-grandparents, they lived and they had families in which they expected to lose children. My great-grandparents, they had like 8 or 9 children, and that was because everybody expected to lose at least a third of your children in life. And so as time has gone in war-torn areas, we expect poverty and we expect troubles. But the more wealthy we get and the more opulent our countries get and the more our medicines get better and the more we have availability to, there's almost a sense of, I have a right to be looked after. I have a right to be cared for. And it's lovely to be in a country where we almost demand it. In fact, because I work in the hospitals as well, we get people coming in who say, now, why is this not going right? I want someone to be held responsible, because there's almost an expectation that we live in a society where you will look after me and you will care for me, and by heck, if you don't, I'm going to nail you. You know what I mean? Okay. So, I want to bring us back to reality a little bit, which is actually we're all going to get confronted at some point in life by pain or loss of some sort. So God talks about it a little bit. He says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So there's a recognition from God, isn't there? A recognition from Jesus Christ, who actually says, you are going to mourn at some stage in life. Psalm 34, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted. Well, there's a recognition there. How about this one? There is a time to weep and a time to laugh and a time to mourn and a time to dance. Ecclesiastes. Scripture is full of it, isn't it? Isn't there? Okay. Could you forward that for me, please? Next one. For some reason it's not. We've got lots of technology issues this morning, haven't we? There we go. So that principle, pain and loss are an inevitable part of life, often unwelcome and unexpected. And in fact, if you go through the Bible, just about every hero, every person, every great story in the Bible is filled with some form of tragedy to start with, isn't it? Before we hear about faith and how important it is. In fact, there's an old saying that says, there is no such thing as maturity without pain. It does not exist without it. And I loathed that statement when I was younger. I used to hate it. No, I don't want to have pain to get mature. Can I just get mature without it, please? Yeah, nah, sorry. Doesn't work, does it? So look at Adam and Eve, first people on earth. They had 2 sons. Isn't it great to be, you get married and you have 2 children, and then one turns out to murder the other one. So one's dead and one's a murderer. As parents, they must have grieved. Is that correct? You would. They just didn't go, let's have more kids, let's just get on with that, and forget about Cain and Abel. They lost them. What about Job? Job had 9 kids, 7 sons, 7 sons, 3 daughters, 10 kids. Anyway, he lost them, all killed, all done, along with his crops, along with his cattle, along with his camels, and he was incredibly wealthy, and he was a man that every day he started off by worshipping God. He was devoted to God, and yet he lost everything. All his hopes and dreams for his children stripped and gone. And did he cry out to God? You bet he did. You only have to read Job to see how he really wails and cries before God and says, what has happened? Look at David and Bathsheba. Look at Solomon. Look at Samson. Samson devoted himself to being a man of God, and then he gets captured and they torture him by gouging his eyes out. It's pretty tough, isn't it? Elijah, he had things happen to him. And of course, the apostles, and we can go on and on and on. There are stories all through the Bible of loss, aren't there? So why are we any different? We're not, are we? And for me, I guess because I go to it every day, there's a part of me that expects it every day. And I admit there's a part of me that holds my breath every day. And when I go and I see tragedies and loss where people have died or they've been injured and all their dreams and hopes have been stripped away, I admit there's a part of me that holds my breath a little bit and goes, am I protected? Am I so different to everybody else in society? And the answer is no. Because God says you will, if you love me, you will face trials. You will face tribulations. We will. And yes, I believe in faith. I believe in miracles. And every day I pray before God and I say, God, I pray that you will protect me, that you will look after my children, that you will look after my grandchildren, that you will look after me. But I also allow the space in there that says, God, Nevertheless, you are my Lord and my God in the midst of tragedy, no matter where that sits. And that's what we've been worshipping. And I've listened to the songs this morning and I've gone, wow. These songs about, that the team has picked them so beautifully about how God is amazing in the midst of, what's that song that says, when I saw mountains, God saw mountains that could be moved. When I saw this, God saw that. Great worship songs, and we stand there and we sing, yes, yes. And what we're really saying is, God, I'm trying to believe and hope that you are amazing in all of this. All right. So pain and loss may alter some dreams and homes and hopes, but it may even rob us of the hopes that we hold dearly. So I just want to acknowledge that before we go on, that actually for some of us, some of the dreams and hopes have been incredibly powerful in our lives. They've been huge. Like, for instance, one of my friends who falls in love with the girl of his dreams. Utterly in love, and he's waited his whole life to find a godly, wonderful girl, gets engaged, and then finds out she's got terminal cancer, and he loses her just as he's about to get married. All his dreams and hopes stripped away from him, and yet he's a godly man. And he wails and weeps before God. And so whenever things go wrong, we automatically ask certain questions like, why did this happen? How did this happen? And who is responsible? Don't we? Doesn't matter whether it's a God issue, whether it's just an everyday. If my car crashes, I'll go, why did this happen? And who's responsible? There's kind of responsibility. And how the heck did this happen? So we automatically do this in our relationship with God. Job does it. King David does it. All through the Bible, there's a recognition that at times we ask these questions. The real issue is how do I travel through it to this place where I can sit and while I'm weeping, look at God and go, yet will I believe in you. Yet will I know in the midst of tragedy where I feel it's almost morally and ethically wrong. And it's one thing to lose someone or to have a tragedy in life through an accident that's not our fault, like a car accident, where we can almost reason it out and go, oh, that's someone else's fault. But when sometimes the incidents occur where you almost feel like, God, I felt almost abandoned in the midst of this, And sometimes when I had incidents where perhaps a girl has been raped or whatever, and she's Christian, and she'll go, I feel almost betrayed. Where were you, God, in the midst of all this? To be able to sit there and go, how do I move forward? How do I regain new hopes and dreams? How do I sit before God and say, yet will I believe that you are my Lord and my Saviour, even though I've had this stripped away from me? It's pretty powerful, isn't it? And we can't ignore it. I did say today I was trying to be positive, didn't I? Yeah. I'm off to a great start, aren't I? Yeah, great. All right. So just to finish that off, I wanted to set the scene and to be very real with you today, because I don't want to bluff my way through, and my work requires me to see the sadness and the grief and the tragedy of the day. But it's always beautiful to sit in the midst of tragedy and to find someone who looks up in the midst of tears at me and actually says, yet will I say that the Lord my God is my Saviour. And they will look at me and they say this to me, and they say, actually, this is most important. And I find people that sit in two camps. There are those that rage and rail at God, and that's fine to do that. But then it drops into something deeper, the sense of offense, as opposed to those who will, yes, cry out to God like Job, but they will look at me and they'll say, at such a time as this, I desperately need my Lord and my God, even though they feel really sad and really hurt through this time. They've had stuff lost. Psalm 88 is called the Psalm, funnily enough, it's called the Psalm of No Hope. It's the only psalm in the Bible where the person just cries out to God. He just cries out. He's in deep pain. He's had everything. In fact, the psalm goes so deep that in the midst of the psalm, the man says, it feels like I'm on the beach of the shore and the waves are just smashing on me and just pounding me and just pounding me. Really, this man is in deep, deep sorrow. He feels and yet it is a psalm in the Bible. And do you know what? I've had many people who will say to me when they feel like they're in the depths of darkness that this psalm is just wonderful for them because they feel like God gets them. Does that make sense? Yeah. Viktor Frankl said this: find purpose outside of pain, or pain will dictate your purpose. In other words, he recognized something really important in life, that when things go wrong, pain will shout at you, pain will cry out to you, and it will say, find who's responsible, find why this happened, and find how this happened. Remember the how, the why, and who's responsible. Pain will automatically do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what Viktor Frankl says is what God has been saying along, which is you need to have a belief that sits before, so that when things happen, you can almost say in the midst of pain, you can say, actually, I will not let my pain dictate my story to me. I instead will dictate my story back to my pain. Do you think you can do that? And that's the beginning of beginning to find hope. So the sermon is about finding hope and dreams, but we have to acknowledge this first. Your ability to find new hopes and new dreams is, number one, first of all, not letting your pain tell you the story. You have to be able to tell your pain the story. Because pain will shout at you and it will demand a who and a why and who's responsible, and it will demand justice and it will demand revenge and it will demand payment. And you will either soak it in and go, yes, I have a right to feel unjust, I have a right to feel morally hurt, I have a right to feel in danger and hurt, or you will dictate back. And you know what? We see it every day. And you know what? The most classic example, one of the most beautiful examples of this is even on the news last night, watching the news clip about one of New Zealand's Paralympians, Rachel, who is she sits on a seat, you know, the ski seats. She's had her life robbed from her through an accident. And so she was a skier, and she has an accident, she becomes a Paralympian. And does she let her pain dictate to her? Does she let her dreams to be this amazing skier get robbed? No, she turns around and she says, right, what's the new dream? What's the new journey? She says, if I can't stand and ski, I'll sit and ski. And so she becomes this amazing Paralympian that wins gold medals. So we can have lots of stories. You all know people in society who, and for me at work, funnily enough, my workplace where I work sits right next door to the orthopedic section, and where they have the new limbs. So every day I see people come in, they've got prosthetic limbs, the prosthetic section, sorry, not an orthopedic, prosthetic. And they come in and they've got new arms, or they've got new legs, or they've got new shoulders, and they walk in. And do you know what one of the things they have in that area is they have psychologists and they have therapists that sit with them, and because they want them to realise, here's the point, which is the biblical point. Either your injury will dictate to you and rob you of a dream, or you will dictate back and say, this will not stop me from having a dream. Does that make sense? And so these people come in getting new limbs, and they get taught, either this will rob you of a dream, or you will say, all right, what's the new dream in this? What's the new challenge? Like Rachel. Yes, I can't ski anymore, so what's the new challenge? But you have to decide that it's okay for you to lose a dream. And that's a very important point we're going to come to in a minute. So here we go. How do we recover? How do we find hope and new dreams when life feels like it's been shattered? When the cause feels unjust, unfair, and morally wrong, like Job, who loses all his children. Can I have another one, please? So, first rule is this. Change what you believe about God in the midst of your pain. It's very pivotal. You have to make room for pain in the midst of God's journey. Because if you don't, you will blame God and you will rail at God and you will demand who's responsible and why, and you will demand justice. So my first point is this. Can you change what you believe about God in the midst of your pain so that today in church you can stand and worship and go, when all I can see is a mountain that blocks my way, actually God sees a mountain that can be removed. Can you do that? Because if you are brought up in a Christian home where you believe that God has an obligation to put you in a bubble and protect you from everything in life, then you are going to be badly hurt, aren't you? All right? When you first get married, if you get married believing that your husband is going to be this wonderful Superman creature who will never make a mistake, then in the first week of your marriage, maybe even the first day, or your wife, or whatever. In other words, we get married and we find these wonderful people and then we discover, oh darn, they're flawed. Hey. Actually, you're not just flawed, you've got serious issues. Hey, can I trade you in? Oh darn, it's too late, I paid the down payment. Number 2, if you want to move forward and find new hopes and dreams when actually you are grieving deeply and you are, yes, sad, you may even be angry towards God at the time, whatever. Next point is this: guard your heart against offense while you grieve. And I know I mentioned this last time, but let's mention it again clearly. What's the difference between anger and offense? Anger is actually where I feel hurt and I want to let you know that I just feel let down. I don't know whether you're responsible or not, God, but actually I need you to know that I'm angry at the world and I'm angry that I had this thing stripped from me. I'm angry that I lost my fiance before I got married, or I'm angry that I've lost a limb, or actually I'm angry that I've lost my marriage. I'm angry that I got married to the wrong person. I'm angry, and God, I'm angry. And like Job, you say, God, I'm just angry, but I still believe in you. That's anger. Anger still holds a sense of belief. And that's what marriage is about. We go, I'm angry at you as my husband or my wife, but I know that I believe you can change, so can you please go and sort yourself out? All right? But offense takes anger and changes it, the belief. That's where we go, not only am I angry, but now I'm offended at you and I don't want anything to know about you anymore. And that's the danger point in life, where now we allow our tragedy to tell us that God is not only hurt us, but God is not worth believing in. And you know what? I'm going to flip the finger at God and I'm going to tell him, I don't want you in my life anymore. In fact, you're not the God of love. You're not the God who cares. You're not the God who rescues. And you're not the God who restores. And you're not the God who gives dreams. And so I want to get rid of you out of my life. That's offense. And Proverbs says, guard your heart against offense, because it is the wellspring of life. Does that make sense? So can I encourage you today, if you've gone through a tragedy, if you are going through a loss, if you're having some of your dreams stripped away from you because you've perhaps got loved ones that are dying or whatever, can I encourage you to actually sit before God, and yes, you can say to him, I'm hurt, I'm angry, but God, I refuse to buy into offense. God, as I weep, I will say, Lord, I'm losing all these hopes and dreams, and it feels incredibly sad. Yet will I believe that you are the God that rescues. Yet will I believe that you can create new dreams. Can you give God room to create a new dream in the midst of tragedy? And the non-Christians do it so well when, like at the prosthetic limb next to me, can I look at my tragedy and say, my tragedy will not rob me of my dreams. Instead, I will look at my tragedy with a new leg or a new arm, and I will say, actually, I dictate to my tragedy. My tragedy does not dictate to me. And that's what God teaches us, doesn't he? That's the story of humanity, that in the midst of sin, where sin robs us of so many things, God says, don't let sin rob you of your dreams. Instead, you need to dictate that because God sits with you, even though you are full of sadness and weeping. All right? Don't place all your hopes and dreams on the fulfillment of one dream. And this is a classic. This robs us from having new hope. It's where people make a dream or a hope a non-negotiable. I'm going to marry, I've got to set aside one person for me in life, and I'm going to marry this person right here. And this girl is my dream. And oh my goodness, she gets cancer and she dies. So what do I do with that when my dream has become what's called a non-negotiable? Do you understand that? Can you make room for God to create new dreams out of something you thought was the one dream? I'm going to encourage you today that if you are sitting here today and you may have a child that's dying, or you may have a partner that's dying, or you may be encountering a tragedy, that you sit back and you say, yes, this was I wanted to go fishing with my son, I wanted to go fishing with my daughter, this was what and we say, God, you cannot. So we now take a non-negotiable and we make it a bargaining point. You will not let this person die. You will not, because this is my one dream. This is a sign that actually if you love me, God, you will not let this happen. And then it does. So can you allow God to create new dreams? And one of the ways is to not make life's events non-negotiable. Does that make sense? Because that's what God promises all through Scripture, that when life robs you of your non-negotiables, that's the hope of Christianity, that when life robs you of your non-negotiables, God sits in the middle and says, do you believe in me that actually I can create new things in you? I can create new hopes and dreams, even though you know this thing has been. Now take Job, which is this next point, I think. New hopes and dreams do not erase the pain of the lost dreams. Job loses 7 boys and 2 girls, or 3 girls. At the end of Job, it says God restored everything and doubled everything to him, except for his children. He didn't end up with 18. All right. But he ended up with another set of about 9 kids. Do you think he forgot about the pain of losing 9? He didn't, did he? So here's the point for today, and that's why God is so important, is that new hopes and dreams do not remove the pain and the grief of lost ones, but my relationship with God allows me to soothe the pain of that. For some of you here today, you've lost a marriage, you've lost a partner through death, but you've found someone else to love because you have given God room. You've given God room and to say, yes, I can believe again that God, even though I thought I was building a life with this person, I don't have it. Actually, I can now have this. Doesn't take away the sadness of this. We will always look back on having lost a son or a child or a daughter or a brother or a sister or a mother or a father early in life, and we will never take away the sadness, but the sadness gets medicated, the sadness gets soothed, doesn't it? Because I believe in the hope of my relationship with Jesus Christ. And can I encourage you today that if you're quietly sitting there going, I am angry and I'm bitter at God, your ability to have new dreams, to sit with God and say, okay, I will not make this a non-negotiable. Number 2, I'm allowed to grieve. Number 3, I give you permission to God today to believe that there can be new dreams and new hopes and a new direction. And number 4, I will not be offended at you. I can be angry and hurt for a while because that's part of grief. And if you are offended, maybe it's time to sit back and ask God for forgiveness and say, God, forgive me for being highly offended. Allow me instead to grieve. And to grieve well, because I do want new hopes and new dreams in my life. All right. Here's the next one. Is this turning a little bit more positive, by the way, so far? I hope so. Here's the next one. New hopes and dreams. Give yourself permission to pivot, to believe. And that's the point of all what we're saying today, is that your ability to pivot when things have been robbed here, your ability to hook straight over here and go, oh, there can be a new, is about all these things. Number one, I will not let my tragedy dictate my story. Instead, I dictate the story. And if I dictate the story with my relationship with God, then it gives me permission to pivot over here. For those of us who've lost marriages or relationships through death or whatever, to be able to go, yes, I give myself permission to have new dreams, and so it allows me to pivot and find new ones over here. So I can encourage you, you can have new dreams, you can have new hopes, you can have new adventures in life. And you know what? We teach this with our kids in the most simplest of ways. Like when we're young, most of us will shift from one town to the next somewhere, or we'll shift to a new area. And when we go to our shift, our kids will beg us and say, don't make me shift school, please, or whatever, because I've got my best friend here and in the school. And we say to our kids, it will be okay, don't we? You will make new friends. And the kids are going, no, you're the worst parent in the world. Don't do that to me. My life is over and it just sucks because I'm about to lose Johnny. And we're going, oh, thank goodness for that. Yeah, we never did like Johnny. You know, you'll find someone better than Johnny. No, there's no one better than Johnny in my life. And we go, okay, come on. And they go to a new town and they come home skipping one day and they go, I made a new best friend. As adults, we learn it's okay to shift jobs and to shift towns or to shift churches, because actually, oh, please don't shift churches, by the way, because we realise that actually we will make new people that will just breathe life into us, and we don't know who those people are, and sometimes we thank God later and we go, man, I'm so glad I came to Northcross because I met Joanne, and Joanne has just been the best thing in my life. I'm still best friends with Fiona from the other one, but actually Joanne is just like gold. Hey, we meet new friends and people that breathe life into us. Give yourself permission to pivot, to believe there can be new dreams. But to be able to do that, you first have to reconcile that the pain you feel is normal in life. It's sad, but it is normal, because that's what we go through. New dreams and goals can and should be part of life's journey. By the way, that counter at the back is supposed to be counting down. It still says I've got 40 minutes. Okay, where am I up to now? About 3? You need to keep me on track. I've lost, how much have I got? 5 minutes left? 10 minutes? Oh, 5 or 10. See how quickly it disappears? New dreams and goals can and should be part of life's journey. In other words, you need to have that as part of your faith, as part of your core beliefs. Do you have a belief that new dreams and goals can and should be part of your life? You haven't just got one non-negotiable that says, I'm going to grow up here, marry this man or this woman, and this is what it's going to be like, or I'm going to be completely healthy till I'm 90 years of age and then drop dead in my sleep. You know? You should have new goals and dreams. Yes, I'm going to have a few parts of my body just clap out on me, you know, and it's going to be all right in some way. What are your new hopes and dreams? And finally, do you believe this one? That your story will be remembered in the future by your children and your grandchildren. They will tell stories about you. In the Bible, we have stories of people who have gone through tragedies, and they never ever thought that thousands of years later, their story would have been told again and again and again and again by churches and by people all around the world, and by hundreds of people sitting in Northcross Church this morning, that they would even think that actually their story of tragedy and finding a new hope was actually remembered. The question is, do you believe that the remembrance of stories only belongs in the Bible? Doesn't, does it? God's teaching you that yes, the stories in the Bible He picked out from just certain people. But the truth is that stories continue and are remembered, and your stories of tragedy and your stories of finding new beliefs will be talked about and whispered about by your children and by your grandchildren. Do you realize that? And they may even be talked out loud in history as time goes on. You just don't realize it yet. So make a choice. How do you want your story to be whispered about in the future? Which brings us to Esther. Let's look at Esther for a moment. We're going to finish today with two quick stories. One from the Bible and one from recent times. Because I want to point out this picture that actually the story that is told is not just in the Bible. And actually this is the story about two teenage girls. And why God gave me but for the last few weeks I've been sitting with this idea of talking about two teenage girls, and then Mark rings me and says, "Oh, can you speak at church?" I went, "Yeah, thank you God, really great." All right, Esther. Esther is captured and taken as a slave. Her parents are killed. She's removed from her. Now this is all about stripping you of all your dreams. And look at this. Look at all her dreams and goals that's stripped. She loses her parents. She's captured and taken away. She's removed from her land. She has to hide her Jewish identity. She's never ever allowed to marry for love. Now I want to point this out. She doesn't get to marry a man that she can actually negotiate with each day. That she can say, "I beg your pardon, what did you say to me?" She can't put her hands on her hips. She can't be a normal woman and a normal wife in the land. She has to marry the man that murders her parents. She has to marry the man responsible for killing her family. And he's the king. And what's worse, the king has certain rules about women. In fact, she learns really quickly that she's chosen because the previous wife, Vashti, I think it's Vashti, dares to put her hands on her hips in front of the king. Do you know what one of the rules are that we read about in the book of Esther? It says that Esther is asked to go before her husband and speak, and she goes, "Heck no. Hell no, there's no way I'm going to before him because I haven't been asked to attend before him." In other words, she can't just go to her husband. She can't have a normal loving relationship where she can say, "How are you? Eat your dinner and your potatoes and quit your complaining." She can't do that. In fact, the scripture says that when she appears before him, she has to bow her head. She's not even allowed to look at him, because if she dares to look at him without permission, she gets killed. In fact, she has to wait and hope. And they say to her, "Please, Esther, step forward and go and appeal." And she goes, "If I dare go before him without being invited, if I step forward that I can actually talk to this man, he can order my death immediately." Now, does that sound like a wife who really is enjoying being married? She lives a married life of fear. She lives a married life where she knows that her life is in danger every day. And what's worse, she's married the man who killed her parents, who ordered the death of her parents. She marries the man who made her a slave. Does that sound like a woman who's had all her dreams and hopes robbed from her? Never marrying the man she wants to marry. She lives with her uncle Mordecai. She marries King Xerxes. And then she discovers it gets even worse. There's a guy in King Xerxes' thing who wants to kill her, Haman. Not only does he want to kill her, but he wants to kill her whole nation. So now she has to make a choice. She dares to believe that actually she can be used in the midst. So she refuses to let her tragedy dictate to her. She sits down, she goes, "Okay, let's see what we can do with this. Can I believe that God can use me? Can I believe that God can restore me? Can I believe?" And so she hears what her uncle Mordecai says. "For such a time as this, I am here." She now becomes the savior of her people by purely stepping forward, and actually the king loves her for what she does. The king admires her and adores her for what she does. And she rescues her whole nation, doesn't she? To the point where to this day, her life is celebrated every year by the celebration of Purim. And goodness knows she didn't realise that a whole book will be devoted to a girl in the Bible. Isn't that an amazing story? A girl who dared to believe that new hopes and dreams can become from a time when the man she married robbed her and stripped her of everything. It's pretty cool. So let me take you to a modern story, a story outside of the Bible, a story of, we all know stories of great people, but this is a story of a girl who never thought that her story would be told. Let me tell you about Hazel. Now, my great-grandfather left New Zealand with his wife, he and his wife, with another couple, Wally and Madge. Madge, I think it was Madge. Wally Mansell and his wife. Both men left as missionaries from New Zealand to go to Africa because they wanted to build a mission station in a city called Bulawayo. But they wanted to go out into the bush, go way out, and they wanted to actually help the African people and teach them about God and teach them there. And so they went and they built a station called Dodaya, which became incredibly famous. And you would think that's a great story, except for what you don't know is that Wally and his wife, who were newly married, went with my great-grandfather, but she was newly pregnant. They get to Africa. Wally goes with my great-grandfather to the mission station. He gets out there. He gets out in the middle of the bush where the paramount chief, who's got in charge of all the other chiefs, says, this is where you were going. Wally gets bitten by malaria, gets sick and dies. So here's a new wife, a pregnant wife, going to Africa. They station themselves in Bulawayo. Her husband takes off for 6 weeks into the bush and dies. Here's a wife that's been stripped of all her hopes and dreams. She's alone in the middle of Africa. She's got no. My great-grandfather goes on to actually do amazing things. But that's not the story we want to tell about. We want to talk about the little baby that sits inside that mum. So this little girl, Hazel, is born. She's born to a single mum who's desperately trying to just survive in a little township called Makakoba. And this mum and this little grew up, and she grows up to learn that actually her father left New Zealand to go and start something amazing and never even got to see anything. They're not even part of the journey. All her hopes and dreams are stripped from her, and this little girl grows up. But you know what little Hazel does? When she's just a teenager, she says to her mum, she says, you know what, let's start a Sunday school here in the middle of Makakoba. And her mum says, what a great idea. So she goes out, and here's this little teenage girl who says to God, I don't know how we're going to do this. So they start a little building gets built, and then she stands up, and you know what they did? They built this building in an octagon. So they had all these 8 little spaces in a circle, and she said, what a good idea to put a little podium in the middle. Within a matter of a year, she is having over 1,000 African boys and girls coming every Sunday. 1,000. This continues for the next 70 years. Every Sunday, 1,000 kids. And that 70 years covers 4 generations. So those kids grow up and they have kids, and those kids grow up and they have kids. And so little Hazel ends up impacting something like 500,000 people. She becomes a legend and she becomes famous. And you can still go to Makakoba today, and you can go there and you can see this church, which is actually about a little bit bigger than this, with a little platform in the middle, and the Sunday school still runs. Hazel, of course, is now dead. My father, I got to learn about it when I was just a little boy, and I was learning all about my great-grandfather until one Sunday morning, my father is loading up his truck. And he's loading up with lollies and sweets and all sorts of things. And I said, Dad, where are you going? And he says, I'm going to Makakoba. I say to him, what's Makakoba? And he says, that's where a Sunday school is. He says, and I'm taking lollies and sweets and goodies to feed 1,000 kids. My father and my father's friends and all the men in the church are so impressed by what a little teenage girl goes. And you know what? Her story is now whispered through the generations, to the point where it's whispered here today in this church, and it's being used to inspire you that actually you can have new dreams and new goals when everything is stripped away from you. And so Hazel says, yet will I believe that the Lord is my God and my Saviour, and I will believe that my tragedy does not tell me a story. Instead, I will let God tell my tragedy a story. And I will let God get into my tragedy, and I will let God change my tragedy into a story that is so great it will impact thousands of people on a daily basis. I wonder what your story is today. So as we finish, through all of today's talk, maybe, I don't know where your journey is. Maybe you're just starting a journey of grief. Maybe you are just coping with the consequences of something awful that's happened. And maybe you are coping with rage and hurt, through to actually coming out the other side and saying, I wonder what my new dreams. Can I encourage you, no matter where you are today, that we stop for a moment and we bow our heads, and the worship team can come up now if you like. It'd be great. I'm going to ask that you stand with me in a minute, and that we just quietly ask God and say, God, I don't know where my journey is, but can I believe that, number one, you could be involved in my tragedy and turn my tragedy into a new dream. I want to say respectfully that some tragedies, the dreams are completely gone, like the loss of a family member, the loss of a husband or a wife who has died. And it's not about taking that tragedy and turning it. It's about saying, I'm going to let that tragedy go and believe that new dreams can come. Maybe that will require some of you to quietly bow the head and say, God, I'm sorry that I've blamed you, and God, I'm sorry I'm so bitter. Forgive me. Set me free, that I can still say when I'm faced with mountains, God, you can move that mountain and change it. Can you be a Hazel? Can you be an Esther today? Let's stand.